like you said, these are very selfish people. They weren't out here donating to nonprofits. But I'm curious, what did everyday life look like for a pirate out on the ocean?
Well, they were pretty cramped conditions because there were a lot of individuals on board. The food was not particularly good, and that's any mariner of the day. Once you're out at sea for more than a couple of weeks, your food is not going to be good. And as time went on during the Golden Age, they had fewer and fewer places to go to replenish. So they relied on what they captured on board ships, their victims. So the food wasn't good, the conditions were cramped, probably smelled. There was lice, there was vermin, there were probably rats on board, there were cockroaches, and it was sort of like periods of punctuated equilibrium. For long periods, there was probably not much to do. They would drink, they would go to where they thought they could find merchant ships, but the ocean's very big and you don't always come across merchant ships, and they didn't have shipping manifests that they could look at and say, oh, that ship's loaded with this. They're going to be here off of St. Kitts on this day. Let's go there. So they basically had to wander the world's oceans and looking for vessels. And then once they found one, they didn't know what kind of vessel they were coming up against unless it was a warship. They didn't know whether this merchant vessel would have anything of value on board. So there were long periods, no doubt, of boredom. And then there were short pulses of sometimes great excitement and potential death. They didn't get into battles that often because most merchant ships were not well defended. Pirates had a bad reputation because occasionally they would attack individuals and kill people who resisted. So most merchant ships who saw a pirate's flag aloft on the main mast would quickly surrender. And they used intimidation as their number one calling card. So I imagine being a pirate was fairly boring for long periods of time, and there might have been quick, sustained minutes or hours or even days of frantic action and fighting in some cases. And then they went back to their boring lives. And when they were able to pull into Nassau in the Bahamas, they probably drank a lot, and there were some women there, and they had fun, and they just hung around. And in Madagascar, they did the same thing. But as the Golden Age wore on into the late 17 teens and 1720s, Nassau, as a pirate haven, was totally shut down by the British, by the English at the time. Well, they were British by that point, by the British forces and Woodes Rogers. So they had no place to go. They had to sort of come into isolated harbors and bays and get whatever they could. They couldn't sail in 1716 or 1713 or 1721. A pirate ship could not sail into Boston and Philadelphia, pull up to the wharf and say, "We need supplies." They would be quickly attacked and surrounded. So they were persona non grata. But again, it was different for the pirates prior to 1700, the Red Sea men, because they were in cahoots with local elected officials, and they were the sons, fathers, and brothers of the colonists themselves who went halfway around the world to attack Mughal ships that were transiting between the Red Sea ports of Jeddah and Mocha and the Indian subcontinent. And those ships had a lot of treasure on board, and often a lot of times they had pilgrims going to Mecca. So they were rich targets, and they were considered infidels by the Christians back in the colonists. They were Muslims after all. So it was not seen as a sin to steal and even kill them and take money from them and then bring it back to the colonies who were starved of currency and other types of East Indian goods. So it was a much different picture in the 1690s when somewhere along the lines of maybe 40 of these ships went to the Red Sea, and many of them came back with considerable amounts of money, and they were welcomed back because the governors had sold them their fake letters of marque, thinking they were going to go out and fight the French, but they didn't. They went off to be pirates. And then when they came back, they paid the governors sometimes as much as 100 pieces of eight per pirate to have permission to go into New York Harbor, to go into Philadelphia, to go into these places unmolested. And then they melted back into into the local communities from which they had come. I mean, some of them ended up killed. Some of them got the wrong end of the stick, but a number of them were able to escape with their money intact. And I think that helped spur the golden age of piracy, the second half of it, which was in the 17 teens and 1720s.
Yeah, for sure. What you described does not sound like a romantic or fun life at all out on the ocean like that with vermin and lice, and that sounds horrible.